Okay. Last segment is kind of we that little PureFlix thing was like the only child-friendly content we have.
Yeah,
this week.
why was this episode so drab?
This is an R-rated episode, we're going back into some dark stuff now. It's time to talk about the new Jeffrey Dahmer show on Netflix. So, warning, there's some content here that is kind of intense. Also, I would like to say ahead of time that we at Theology Thursday do not endorse or recommend this show. I haven't watched. I've seen bits and pieces of it. I haven't watched the show, nor do I really plan to, but I did a little bit of research, and even from what the conversation I had with Mac, like, even if you're
I'm the only one who's seen this show.
Like, even if you like horror or, like, thrillers or kind of stuff, like, this is pretty intense, right? Like, it's a little much.
It's very intense, and it's exactly the opposite of what Johnny was just saying about, like, those Hallmark movies are very, like, warm or, like, inviting, something you can watch with the family. This is definitely not that at all.
Yeah. So why is it that on a show like Everyday Theology, us little Christian boys would want to talk about Jeffrey Dahmer? What's the deal, Mac?
Okay, so I didn't think you were going to let me talk about this show.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I get to, because it opened up a lot of questions and a conversation for me. So first of all, the thing is, this show, you know what, actually real quick, I'm going to put myself in the corner so I can get your reactions. This show is like one of the highest viewed shows on Netflix. It was like the #1 show at its opening weekend. Because people have a fascination with this true crime thing. You know, and
it's definitely a thing. Like, a lot of people are like that. They love their true crime.
They do. And apparently a lot of them are like soccer moms. I don't know if you knew this. Like 70-something% are like soccer moms.
That's odd.
Isn't that very weird?
I believe it, though. I believe it.
Like, you'd think it'd be like weird, like adolescent men, but it's not. It's like fully grown women who have children. I digress. So I won't get into the specifics of the show, and obviously I won't recommend that you watch it, maybe, unless you're, really into that type of thing. But this show is about Jeffrey Dahmer, who was a serial killer and a cannibal from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You probably at least have heard his name before. But the show goes through his life, his childhood. It actually talks about the victims. It talks about the police's inaptitude to catch him and some of, like, the racism and issues, cultural issues that were going on during the early 90s when he finally got caught. But specifically for Everyday Theology, I want to talk about the final episode, which is entitled God of Forgiveness, God of Vengeance. And this episode opens with a clip of John Wayne Gacy, who is another killer, who was the guy who dressed up like a clown. And he was the guy that inspired the movie It, with the spooky clown. And it goes through this episode, and you have Dahmer in jail by this point. I believe he got like a 999-year sentence, like 15 life sentences. And he's in prison, and he goes to the prison chaplain, and he's like, how can I be forgiven of all this terrible stuff? Because throughout the show, there is kind of a dialogue about God. It's kind of on the back burner throughout most of it. Dahmer doesn't believe in God. But he goes to this pastor figure, I think he's like a Catholic priest, and this man in this Netflix show for like 2 or 3 minutes just lays out this gospel presentation in the middle of Dahmer, which is not what I was expecting at all for this show. And he tells Dahmer about, you know the story all too well about, Christ is on the cross and there's these 2 criminals aside him, and the one criminal is making fun of him, and the other guy is like, hey, we deserve to be up here, but this man is innocent, and he's taking this brunt on himself. And Jesus says to him, today you will be with me in paradise. And the priest says to Dahmer, you are like these other guys, these criminals. You deserve your punishment, but Christ can forgive you of anything. And then the show later goes on to, there are these other side characters. This woman, Glenda is her name, I believe. She was Dahmer's neighbor at the time of the murders. And she goes to church and has a talk with her pastor, And she's like, I forgive my neighbor, quote unquote, a lot. But when it comes to this man who did so many horrible things, does he deserve to be forgiven? Does God forgive him, and should I? And the pastor doesn't really have all of the answers. He just kind of says we can pray to be who God needs us to be and to forgive others. And it opened up a lot of questions. Toward the end of the show, I'm just kind of summarizing this in a nutshell to get your thoughts on it. But at the end of the episode, if you don't know what happened, Dahmer was killed in prison by an inmate. And this man, from what he said, was a Christian, and he said that God told him to punish Dahmer for what he had done to all those people, including children. And Dahmer says to him, well, God is a God of forgiveness. And he goes, well, my God's a God of vengeance. And then he kills him. And it opens up this discussion in the show, and I think for the viewer to say, hey, how much forgiveness does God allow, especially when you have someone as heinous as Dahmer and what he did? Is there forgiveness for this person? Is it warranted? And should we forgive them? So it had a lot of takeaways for me, but I just wanted to hear your feedback, I guess, on that. I know you haven't seen the show, but... and I brought up the intro of the episode with John Wayne Gacy, another serial killer, because the same day that Gacy was, I guess the death penalty was illegal at the time in Wisconsin. Gacy did not live in Wisconsin, and therefore he was given lethal injection. And the same day that he was killed was the same day that Dahmer was baptized. And so you watch the scene. It's like a kind of an artistic scene where you see like this other serial killer who was very not remorseful. He was very prideful at the end and was content with what he did, being killed. And then you parallel to Dahmer coming out of the water in the baptismal. And so I don't know, it was a very interesting episode. It had a lot of takeaways for me. And it was odd because parts of the episode felt like I was watching a Christian movie. And then I was like, wait, this is the Jeffrey Dahmer show on Netflix,
Right.
produced by the American Horror Story guys. So, yeah, that's my little soapbox.
Yeah, I always love. I have a couple movies. I don't know if I have any shows like that, but where it's not. You don't go into it expecting to have some sort of really deep like theological lesson there, or even conversation. Sometimes the best ones don't even have an answer. It's not really a lesson. It's just to bring up some questions. But I think that's a conversation that a lot of people wrestle with is how do we balance God's like wrath, vengefulness, and forgiveness? Like where do we place all this? And what is right for us to take into our own hands and what isn't? And this is a big conversation.
I think like everybody has a line, really, though. Like, I mean, ultimately, I think that believers do have this supernatural ability to forgive, like, really heavy stuff. And I've seen testimonies of that. But even then, there's sort of this thing of, like, if God will save you, so be it. But, like, there's still a clear line in the sand of, like, you know, and, like, with somebody like that and with those crimes, to me, it would definitely be an instance of course, I mean, God's grace is sufficient, and that's entirely up to to God if he would, you know, spend his blood on somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer. So I think it raises more questions than answers, and I think we need to be mindful of that. Like, what's the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, right? And like in our lives with each other. Obviously, we're reconciled to God, but can we be reconciled to every person? I don't think so. You know, so there's a lot of questions there.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting questions, though, comes from how Jeffrey Dahmer's life was ended. Is you had another individual kill him and say, God told me to do this because you're so that you have to pay for your sins.
God told him not to do that. When he said, vengeance is mine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's why there's scripture, vengeance is mine, thou shalt not murder, which, by the way, no matter what Jeffrey Dahmer did, that was murder.
Right.
So I think there's an interesting conversation there to remember that, like, we may feel like we are doing a just and right thing. We got to take. It's such a bad person. Of course, we got to take this into our own hands. But at the end of the day, that is up to God. Well,
I don't know how it plays out in the show, but it seems to me to be painting this picture of the whole, oh yeah, we fully love and embrace you and everything's fine now, that is sort of like, that doesn't work. And this whole, well, we should just kill you because you're worse than anybody else, that doesn't work either.
Right.
It's a lot of times going to be somewhere in the middle. And I think for a believer, it's got to involve forgiveness if they're, families or whatever. But like, it can't be, I'm going to kill this, God told me to kill this guy, and it can't be, I'm totally at peace with everything that happened,
Right.
It oftentimes forgive, and I think too, what that highlights is something really incredible, is that only God has the power to forgive at that capacity, right? To really wipe the slate clean. We can, by his power, forgive in the sense of being able to let it go, but like, it's not our place, nor can we, by forgiving that person, make it all right. There's still a lot that's wrong. Like the bad stuff happened.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, it shows God's forgiveness as otherworldly, I think.
Yeah, because I think that's the biggest question that people might have is, can God forgive? Like, can Jeffrey Dahmer be forgiven for what he's done?
That's the clickbaity question here is Jeffrey Dahmer in heaven?
Right.
Was he forgiven?
And I'll say this, like the first thing that comes to mind when I hear about that, because at that point he's in prison, he's not going to be committing any more of, the acts that he was doing outside of, like, he realizes at that point that it's over. And there's probably this, he's got 15 life sentences, whatever it is, like, that's it. And so was it just motivated by a fear of hell? Like, oh, this is it, and when I'm probably going to die sometime soon, and if I do, I don't want to go to hell, and I know I've done some pretty messed up stuff. So, the question, was he really saved? Is he really a Christian? We can't answer that. This could have been just a fear-motivated thing. It could have been sincere. I don't know. But I do think the important takeaway is that, yes, God can forgive someone even that far gone.
Yep.
Yeah. He's certainly capable of it. But I do think of the Lewis quote often of, the gates of hell are shut from the inside. So, we don't know the answer to that question, but was this motivated merely by just trying to feel better about himself for the rest? We don't know the answer to that question, but I think that that's probably likely, to be honest with you, because of human nature and because of, but we don't know. That's the thing. It's all on him. Yeah,
we don't know. And is it possible that a lot of these actions, not that this at all absolves anybody from it, is it possible? And when you see somebody that far gone, like they've snapped that much, there's obviously mental illness going on, and quite possibly a level of demonic oppression going on. Yeah. And so is it possible that in somebody's lifetime that they could be delivered of a demonic force that does make them capable of recognizing that their actions are wrong and repenting? Certainly.
It's possible.
But we just don't know.
Yeah.
But if there is a takeaway, I think it's that God's grace is sufficient, and that we should not take vengeance into our own hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are good takeaways. Just one final thing. In Hebrews 8:12, sorry, I'm not a good Bible rememberer. It says, I will forgive their wickedness, and I will remember their sins no more. And so God, if Jeffrey was sincere, I have no idea. We don't, like you guys said, we have no clue. But God has this supernatural ability to not only forgive, but forget. Yet we in our human nature can never forget such terrible things committed, not just to those select people that he attacked, but also just to humanity, and like the things that happened. So anyways, that was just kind of a thing I wanted to get your take on. I know it was kind of a hot topic show. But it raised a lot of questions, and I think it did have some takeaways, even despite how kind of icky it was.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, Ryan, do the thing.
You want me to do this?